In the forgotten corners of Asia, where the mist clings to ancient stone and the wind speaks in lost dialects, there are stories never meant to be told aloud. Stories passed down in hushed tones, from grandmother to grandchild, from shaman to mourner, warning us of rituals that were abandoned for good reason. This is Whispers of Asia, a place where the dead are never silent and the living must remember. Here we breathe life into the folklore buried beneath banyan roots and temple ruins, stories of spirits that linger, rituals that curse, and grief that opens doors best left closed. Tonight's tale comes from the shadowed hills of northern Thailand. It begins not with a scream, but with the steady beat of a drum meant to guide the dead. But what happens when that drum is struck by the wrong hands at the wrong time for the wrong soul? This is not just a ghost story. This is a ritual, a reckoning, a final call for what was buried without peace. Let us begin. The road to Ban Na Swang wound like a serpent through the mist-drenched hills of Chiang Rai. It was the kind of road that vanished under fog just as quickly as it appeared. Trees leaned inward from either side, as if whispering secrets to the asphalt, secrets they didn't want the living to hear. Nam Tip sat in the back of the pickup truck, clutching her mother's scarf to her chest. It still smelled faintly of lavender and temple incense. Her fingers dug into the worn cotton fabric like it was a lifeline, the only thing anchoring her to a world that had suddenly tilted sideways. She hadn't spoken in hours. Neither had her grandmother, who sat stiffly beside her, eyes fixed ahead. The old woman's face was carved from grief, her mouth set in a line that looked permanent. They hadn't come to this village in more than a decade, not since Nam Tip was a child. Back then, Ban Na Swang had seemed like a fairy tale, full of wildflowers and bamboo houses, monks in orange robes gliding barefoot through the dust. But now, it felt different, heavier. As they passed through the wooden village gate, carved with lotus blossoms and naga heads, the fog grew thicker. It clung to the skin, damp and cold, muffling every sound. Even the cicadas were silent. The pickup slowed to a crawl, its tires crackling over the gravel path. Villagers emerged from their doorways to stare. Some bowed politely, others simply watched. Nam Tip met one woman's eyes, a woman with silver hair and a neat bun, holding a tray of incense and marigolds. The woman's smile never reached her eyes. The truck stopped in front of an old teakwood house near the edge of the village. It stood tall and dark beneath the arms of a giant banyan tree. Its windows were shuttered, its wooden slats gray with age. Nam Tip remembered it, vaguely. This had been her mother's childhood home, her grandmother's house, the house that no one had lived in since her grandfather died, the house that people said was left alone for a reason. They unpacked in silence. No one offered to help. Her grandmother moved like a shadow, her bones tired, her steps light as ash. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old rain. Cobwebs hung like silk curtains in the corners. The wooden floor creaked under their feet, but not in protest, more like a warning. She set her small suitcase down in the corner room. The air here was colder than outside. The walls were bare, except for a single faded photograph of a woman in traditional silk robes. She wore no smile, just a pair of eyes that followed. Her mother's funeral was brief, too brief. A sudden illness, no time for last words, no goodbyes. The cremation had taken place in Bangkok, but her ashes had been brought here, to be scattered in the family village, her final wish. She hadn't understand why. Now, standing in the room where her mother had once slept as a girl, she began to feel the weight of that wish. That night, they lit incense for the altar at the center of the house. Her grandmother chanted quietly in the old tongue, not the modern Thai Namtip used in school, but something older, the dialect of the hills. The house groaned in the wind. Somewhere outside, a bell rang once, faint and distant, even though no one had struck it. As the incense smoke curled upward, Namtip felt something shift, not in the air, but in her chest, a pressure, tight and low, like something watching, not malevolent, but not welcome either, just waiting. She told herself it was just the grief, the exhaustion, the change in altitude. But when she lay down to sleep, she heard something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. A low, muffled thump, like someone striking a hollow log, coming from beneath the floorboards. Once, then again. 7 times in total. She sat up, holding her breath. The sound stopped. The night outside remained still. No wind, no crickets, no dogs barking. Only silence and the faint smell of smoke, though the incense had long burned out. In the morning, she asked her grandmother if she had heard anything. The old woman didn't look at her. She simply muttered, "Don't ask questions you don't want answered." Over the next few days, Namtip wandered the village, hoping to clear her head. She avoided the center, where the gossiping women gathered. She could feel their eyes, hear the murmurs in Thai too thick with accent to catch fully. But she heard one word again and again, ruin, sometimes whispered, sometimes spat. No one explained it. No one looked her in the eye when she asked. She explored the nearby paddy fields, walked along the temple wall covered with moss and age, and found herself drawn again and again to the base of the banyan tree outside the house. There were offerings placed there. Tiny clay dolls, red string, bowls of dried rice and rotting bananas. Local spirits, she assumed. Harmless things. Until she saw that one of the dolls had her mother's name carved in its chest, and her own name scratched faintly underneath. She showed it to her grandmother. The old woman snatched it from her hand and threw it into the fire without a word. But that night, the sound returned. 7 thumps. Always 7. And with each beat, the air grew colder. One afternoon, a monk visited the house. He was young, younger than Namtip expected, maybe in his early 30s. His eyes were kind, but tired. He brought a bag of candles and joss sticks, but he didn't smile. He bowed deeply to her grandmother. Then, turning to Namtip, he said softly, "Not everything wants to be remembered." She wanted to ask him what he meant, but the look her grandmother gave him said enough. The monk left, but that night she found something beneath her pillow, a folded note written in careful penmanship. "If you hear the drum, do not answer. If you answer, do not speak. If you speak, pray she is not listening." There was no name on the note. Namtip didn't sleep that night. She waited for the thumping. It didn't come. Instead, she heard breathing. Slow, deep, just beneath the floorboards. And a woman's voice, soft, almost a lullaby, humming a tune she hadn't heard since childhood. her mother's favorite lullaby. Only this voice was colder, and it didn't stop when she closed her eyes. It only grew louder. By morning, the fog hadn't lifted. It hadn't lifted in days. The sun was just a pale blur behind thick gray. And in the rice fields, the villagers gathered around a scarecrow that had been torn apart in the night, its straw stuffing replaced with dried flowers, ashes, and human hair. No one spoke, but every single head turned to watch Namtip as she walked by. They didn't accuse her. They didn't blame her. But they knew. Whatever was stirring in the hills, whatever had been forgotten, had just been awakened. The next morning, the fog hung thicker than before, heavy, white, endless. It swallowed the village whole. Even the temple bell tower, which usually pierced the skyline, was now just a faint silhouette above the mist. Namtip woke to the sound of dripping water. It came from somewhere inside the house, rhythmic and hollow, like rain falling on an empty bowl. But when she checked a roof, there was no leak. When she looked outside, the sky was dry. Her grandmother was gone, probably at the temple, she assumed. She left a bowl of rice on the table, covered with a piece of banana leaf. It was cold by the time Namtip touched it, cold and untouched, as if it had been left for someone else. The sound of dripping continued. Tap, tap, tap. Following it, she walked barefoot through the wooden hallway, the old boards creaking beneath her. The sound led her to the living room, the one with the old altar at its center. Candles had melted into twisted shapes. Wax pooled on the floor like pale, hardened blood. Then she saw it. Right beneath the altar, one of the floor planks was slightly raised, just enough to catch the light. Namtip knelt down, brushing away dust and dead insects. The edge of the plank was cracked, revealing a narrow gap beneath. The smell that escaped was faint but sharp, like old rain mixed with something metallic. Her fingers hesitated above the wood. The air seemed thicker here, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She pressed down on the plank. It groaned but didn't move. She pushed harder. The sound it made when it finally came loose was almost alive, a dry moan, followed by the faint sigh of trapped air escaping. Below, in the darkness, something waited. A rolled-up bundle wrapped in faded red cloth, bound tightly with black string. It looked ceremonial and old. The edges of the cloth were damp, the fabric stiff and sticky with age. She hesitated, then slowly began to unwrap it. Layer after layer peeled away, revealing what lay within. A long, narrow drum, carved from dark wood, capped at both ends with animal hide that had turned gray with time. Around its body were intricate engravings, lotus flowers, coiling serpents, and symbols she didn't recognize, symbols that made her skin prickle. It was beautiful and wrong. The kind of wrong that hums quietly in the bones before the mind understands why. She ran her fingers over the surface. The hide was smooth, but cold. Too cold, like it had been waiting in shadow for far longer than it should have. Then she noticed the stains. Brown, crusted patches near the edge. They looked like blood. Her grandmother's voice startled her. "What are you doing there?" Namtip turned. The old woman stood in the doorway, eyes wide, not in anger, but in something close to fear. "I heard something," Namtip said quietly. "Under the floor. It was dripping." Her grandmother didn't move closer. She just stared at the drum, her lips trembling. "Put it back." "What is it?" Namteep asked. Her grandmother's voice dropped to a whisper. "Something that should have been buried with the dead." That night, the drum sat beneath the altar again, sealed under a fresh layer of wooden planks. Her grandmother spent hours chanting in front of it, lighting incense until the entire room swam with smoke. The chanting was low, steady, desperate. Namteep sat on the floor behind her, hugging her knees. The smoke stung her eyes, but she didn't leave. Finally, her grandmother blew out the candle and turned to her. "Promise me," she said. "Promise you will not touch it again." "I promise." The old woman nodded once, then left the room. But the moment the door shut, the floorboards creaked. Once, twice, and then came a sound she recognized. A deep, hollow thump. The drum was beating itself. The next morning, her grandmother was gone again, this time without leaving breakfast. The fog outside had thickened so much that the world felt erased. The banyan tree outside was nothing but a gray shadow behind the curtain. She tried to distract herself, sweeping the floor, washing dishes, folding clothes that didn't need folding. But she couldn't stop thinking about the drum, about the sound it made, about the warmth she felt beneath her palms when she touched it. She tried to tell herself it was her imagination, that grief plays tricks on the living. But when she passed the altar, she saw something she couldn't explain. The floorboards had shifted again, slightly, as if something beneath them had moved. That afternoon, an old man from the village stopped by. He introduced himself as Uncle Weechai, a caretaker of the temple grounds. His face was lined and leathery, his eyes milky but alert. "I came to see your grandmother," he said. "The head monk sent me. There's talk." Namteep poured him tea and asked, "Talk about what?" He didn't answer right away. He stared at the house instead, his gaze lingering on the altar, then on the floorboards beneath it. "Your grandmother's family," he said, "was once known for their drummers. They played at funerals, guiding souls to the river. The drum you found, it belonged to one of them." "To who?" His eyes met hers. "To the one who should never have been mourned." He stood up then, finished his tea in silence, and left without another word. That night, Namteep couldn't sleep. The air was thick and still. Even the insects had stopped. Only the faint crackle of the altar candle filled the silence. She told herself not to look, not to listen, not to think about what lay beneath. But then came that sound again, not dripping this time, not footsteps, just a single, deliberate beat. Thump! It echoed through the wooden frame of the house, deep and resonant, like the heart of the mountain itself was beating. Then another, and another. 7 in total. Namteep sat frozen, eyes fixed on the floor. The candle flickered once and went out. In the dark, she could hear breathing again. Not from outside, from below. Soft, wet, patient. Then a whisper rose, muffled through the floorboards. A woman's voice, low, broken, trembling, yet filled with something familiar, a tone she hadn't heard since her mother's last words in the hospital. "Namteep!" Her name. She fell back, heart pounding. "Mom?" No answer, just silence. Then, "Why did you wake me?" The voice was no longer her mother's. At dawn, her grandmother found her on the floor beside the altar, trembling and pale. The old woman didn't speak. She simply pressed a talisman into her hand, a small clay disc etched with lines she couldn't read, and whispered, "Keep this near your heart, And whatever happens, do not beat the drum." Namthip nodded, though she didn't understand. Her grandmother's voice shook as she added, "Because every spirit it calls needs something in return." That evening, Namthip went to the river alone. The mist rolled low over the water, and she could barely see her reflection. She knelt at the edge, washing her hands in silence. Something drifted by. At first she thought it was a lotus offering, a small raft of flowers and candles like those used for Loi Krathong. But when it turned, she saw that it was made of woven hair, held together by dried red thread, the candle still burning faintly at its center. The hair was black, the exact shade as her mother's, and tied around the candle stem was a strip of red cloth, the same kind that had wrapped the drum. When she returned to the house, the air was colder. The fog had crept inside through the windows, curling against the walls like living smoke. And on the floor before the altar, someone had drawn a circle of ash. Inside the circle sat the drum, unwrapped, uncovered, clean, waiting. Beside it, in a neat row, lay 7 sticks of incense. Namthip didn't remember lighting them, but they were burning. And through the smoke, a shadow moved, tall, slow, graceful, the outline of a woman in traditional Thai silk robes. Namthip couldn't see her face, only the movement of her hands forming the gestures of a long-forgotten dance. The woman turned slowly, and though her face was hidden behind strands of hair, her mouth was moving, chanting words Namthip couldn't understand. And beneath her feet, the drum began to tremble, not from touch, but from recognition. It was alive again. By morning, Namthip's grandmother was gone. The villagers said they saw her walking toward the temple just before dawn, carrying incense, muttering prayers, her eyes unfocused. She never came back. And that night, for the first time since the fog began, the moon appeared, a pale blood-colored crescent above the mountains. Namthip sat alone in the dark house, the talisman warm in her hand, the drum whispering softly beneath her feet. And when the first beat sounded again, low, rhythmic, ancient, she didn't run. She listened, because this time, the voice that followed was crying. For 3 nights, Namthip didn't sleep. The house creaked with a life of its own, floorboards breathing, walls whispering, windows rattling, though the air was still. The fog outside never lifted. It had become a living thing, pressing its cold fingers against the glass, waiting to be let in. Her grandmother hadn't returned. Not a single villager came to the house. The food she left by the altar had begun to rot, yet she didn't throw it away. The scent of decay mingled with incense smoke and candle wax until the air itself felt sacred or cursed. The drum remained beneath the altar, quiet, watching, but she could feel it, pulsing faintly under the floor like a heartbeat, not a living one, but something older, slower, more deliberate. Each night she told herself she wouldn't listen. Each night she did. On the 4th night it began again. At first it was soft, distant, a dull thump that seemed to come from somewhere beneath the earth. Then another, and another. Each one stronger, closer. The 7th strike made the candle flames bend sideways as though pushed by wind. Namthip froze. The sound wasn't just beneath her now. It was inside her, in her chest, behind her ribs, matching her heartbeat. She whispered, barely breathing, "Who are you?" No answer, only silence. And then, from beneath the floorboards, a single breath, deep and ragged, followed by a woman's voice, trembling, almost sorrowful. "You called me." Namtip stumbled backward. Her hand brushed against the wood, leaving smears of candle soot on the wood. "I didn't! I swear I didn't!" The voice came again, softer now, closer. 7 beats, 7 gates. Each one opens what should remain closed. The floor shifted. Someone was moving beneath it. The old planks groaned, the dust rippled, and faint shapes pressed upward from below, like fingers reaching through the wood. Namtip couldn't breathe. She grabbed the talisman her grandmother had given her and clutched it so tightly that it cut into her palm. The air grew colder. The smell of damp earth and smoke filled the room. And then, from the dark space beneath the altar, a faint red light appeared, pulsating, rhythmic, in perfect time with the drum. Namtip backed away until her shoulders hit the wall. The red light pulsed faster. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than sound. And out of that silence came something worse. The faint sound of humming. A lullaby. The same tune her mother used to sing, but slower, broken, wrong. Each note seemed to bend, melting into the next. Namtip's eyes filled with tears before she realized she was crying. "Mom?" she whispered. The voice stopped humming. Then it spoke. "You shouldn't have called." Morning brought no comfort. The fog had crept inside again, thin tendrils twisting through the windows like smoke. The entire house smelled of old wood and sorrow. Namtip hadn't slept. She sat by the window, clutching the scarf her mother had left behind, watching the mist move like a living thing. When she finally stepped outside, the village looked empty. Chickens wandered freely, their feathers slick with dew. The temple bell hung silent, but someone was waiting by the gate. It was the young monk from before, his saffron robe damp with fog, his hands clasped before him. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "The villagers say the drum has been awakened." Namtip's voice was small. "What does it mean?" He hesitated, then looked toward the hills. "The Klongyang was meant only for the dead. It is struck 7 times during a funeral, each beat guiding the soul toward release. But if it is struck outside a funeral, when the air is not sanctified," he trailed off. "When the air is not sanctified," she repeated, "what happens?" He looked at her then, eyes sunken, dark with fear. "The drum still calls, but not only the one you want to reach." That night she dreamed of rivers, black water, no moon, no sound. She was standing at the edge of the bank, barefoot in the mud, the fog thick around her. The air smelled of smoke and rain. Across the river stood a woman, her back turned, her long hair soaked and dripping. "Mom!" Namtip called. The woman didn't move. Namtip took a step closer. The mud swallowed her feet. The water whispered against her ankles. When the woman finally turned, her face was not her mother's. It was pale, cracked like porcelain. The eyes were hollow, black, endless. And from her mouth came that same low chant, 7 beats, 7 gates. Namtip woke screaming. She ran to the altar. The candle was already lit. The drum was there again, uncovered this time, sitting in the center of the room like it belonged. Its surface glistened with moisture, as though something inside was sweating. She should have run. She didn't. Something in her chest, grief, love, madness, pushed her forward. She lifted the wooden stick that lay beside it. Her hand trembled as she held it above the drumhead. Just once, she told herself, just once to make it stop. She struck it. The sound was deep, not like music, but like thunder echoing through bone. The house shook. Outside, the fog swirled violently, as though caught in a storm. Then she struck it again. The second beat came heavier, and the ground beneath her pulsed, once, twice, in time with the rhythm. The candle flames elongated, stretching toward the ceiling. Shadows began to move along the walls, not from the light, but from something else. She struck the drum a third time. This time, she heard footsteps outside, slow, heavy, dragging through the dirt. The fourth beat. A shape passed the window, tall, thin, swaying. The fifth. The sound of whispering filled the room, dozens of voices overlapping in languages she couldn't understand. The sixth. Something brushed her shoulder, cold, wet, unseen. And then, before she could stop herself, she struck it the seventh time. The world went silent. Even the insects had stopped. Only her heartbeat remained, fast, unsteady, echoing in her ears. Then, from somewhere deep within the house, came the sound of water, dripping, flowing, rising. She looked down. Her bare feet were submerged. The wooden floor was flooding, though there was no source, no rain, just black water seeping up through the cracks, carrying with it the smell of rot and river mud. The reflection in the water rippled once, and then solidified. A woman's face stared back, but it wasn't Namtip's. It was not human at all. Its skin was gray, bloated, the mouth sewn shut with red string. The eyes were open wide, filled with tears that didn't fall. And then from behind her reflection, another figure rose. The same woman she had seen across the river in her dream, drenched, silent, swaying. She reached out with hands that dripped black water and whispered, "You opened the gates." The floorboards buckled. The candle extinguished itself. The world tilted. And then came the screams, not from Namtip, not from any living throat, but from the walls themselves. When she woke, the room was dry again. The drum sat quietly in front of her, innocent as ever. Her hands were bleeding, thin cuts across her palms as though holding rope too tight. She looked around the house. Everything was where it had been. The incense had burned to ash. Only one thing had changed. On the wall beside the altar, carved deep into the wood, were 7 symbols, fresh, still wet with sap, matching the ones engraved on the drum. Each one glowed faintly in the dark. And as she stared at them, she realized something terrible. The drum wasn't the curse. It was the invitation. And she had just sent it. That night, as she lay on the floor, too afraid to close her eyes, the lullaby began again. This time, it came from outside, from the banyan tree, from a woman's voice that wasn't her mother's, and yet somehow still sounded like love twisted into grief. Each note echoed through the night, soft, trembling, soaked in longing. By the time it ended, Namtip understood. The dead she called weren't coming. They were already here. The fog did not lift. Not the next morning, not the morning after. It thickened. It swelled like smoke that never knew fire. It clung to the village like skin, seeping into every wall, every breath. Namtip stood at the threshold of the house, eyes straining beyond the curtain of gray. Nothing stirred. The village felt abandoned, but she knew better. They were watching, hiding, whispering through the walls of bamboo homes. Doors stayed closed, curtains didn't flutter. It was as if the entire village was holding its breath, waiting for something unspeakable to pass. Something that had already entered. Namtip didn't eat, couldn't. Her mouth tasted like ash, and her stomach coiled with nausea. Her hands trembled whenever she passed the altar. The drum sat silently now, almost too silently, like it was listening. She tried to stay away from it, but she couldn't stop thinking about the seventh beat and what it had released. That night, she heard footsteps outside her window, slow, dragging, wet. She rose and parted the curtain. A woman stood at the edge of the rice paddy, just beyond the crooked fence. She was still, unnaturally still, as if suspended in the fog. Her long black hair hung limp, soaked to the ends. She wore a faded silk funeral robe, white with gold thread, stained with patches of red and soil. Namtip's heart dropped. "Mom?" she whispered. The figure didn't respond. Namtip stepped outside barefoot, drawn forward by something deeper than logic, something primal and aching. She walked across the muddy earth, past the rotting scarecrow, closer to the field's edge. The woman didn't move, didn't breathe. Namtip stopped only a few feet away. And then, with a single sharp gust of wind, the woman's hair parted. Namtip saw her face, or rather, the absence of it. There were no eyes, no mouth, no nose, just smooth, stretched skin. A face erased, a soul that no longer needed features. Namtip fell backward in the mud, gasping. The figure tilted its head, and though it had no eyes, she felt it staring into her. When she woke, it was morning. She was back inside the house. The floor beneath her was dry. Her palms were caked with dirt. There were bruises on her arms, fingerprints in the shape of hands too long to be human. The village remained silent, but when she looked outside again, the figure was gone. She tried to convince herself it had been a dream, but that afternoon she saw the first body. A man from the village, one of the elders, was found by the temple steps. His body was slumped in a kneeling position, hands pressed together in prayer. His ears had been removed, cleanly, surgically. His eyes had been blackened, as if by fire. His mouth was sealed with a red thread tied in 7 knots. The monks carried his body in silence. No ritual, no chant, just ashes and smoke. No one explained, but the look in their eyes said, this was not the first time. Namtip returned home shaking. She lit incense at the altar and knelt before the drum. It didn't move, but the silence around it was heavy, like an accusation. She whispered, "What did I do?" And the house answered with a creak, a slow, long groan of old wood bending to weight that wasn't there. She didn't want to believe it, but something had come through, something older than grief, hungrier than longing, and it had no face because it wore them all.
That night, the faceless woman returned. This time, she stood just beyond the altar, her back to Namtip. Namtip didn't speak. She couldn't. Her voice had dried in her throat like cracked clay. The woman began to hum, a tune Namtip almost recognized, a funeral chant, but broken, corrupted. Then she turned again. The face was still blank, but now as Namtip stared, she saw faint indentations, as if someone had tried to carve features but gave up halfway. There was a hole where the mouth should have been, bleeding a slow, steady trickle of black water. Namtip screamed. The woman stepped forward, and in the voice of a child, echoing from the walls rather than the mouth, it whispered, "Return what was taken." In the morning, Namtip found 7 clay dolls arranged in a perfect circle at the base of the banyan tree. Each had a name carved into it. Some were villagers she didn't know, but one of them had her mother's name. Another had her own. Their heads had been broken off, and in their place, placed carefully, were red beetles, still alive, still twitching, trying to burrow deeper into the clay. She ran to the temple. The head monk wouldn't see her. Only the young monk, the one who had visited before, stepped out to meet her. "There's something inside the drum," she whispered. He said nothing. "I saw her, the one without a face. She speaks without sound." The monk closed his eyes. "She was the first," he said finally. "First what?" He turned to face the temple wall. On it, faint and worn, was a mural, old and cracking, of funeral rites. At the far end, almost hidden behind layers of dust and time, was a figure, draped in white, kneeling beside a drum. Her face had been scratched out. "The story is older than any record," he said. "A girl wrongly accused, executed without prayer. No name given, no rites. Her soul had nowhere to go, so it lingered, hungry, grieving. She began to take the faces of mourners, hoping one would fit." Namtip's breath hitched. "Her name was Rune." The monk froze. "That name is forbidden," he whispered. "Only the family that condemned her can speak it, and only once the debt is paid." Namtip's voice shook. "She was my grandmother's sister." That night, the fog bled into the house again. No matter how many windows Namtip shut, it seeped through cracks, filled the rooms like water, and the faceless woman was waiting inside. This time, she stood over the altar, her hands resting gently on the drum. She lifted her head slowly, and though there was no face, Namtip felt her smile. Not kind, not cruel, just patient. As if saying, "You know what must come next." Then, without touching it, the drum began to vibrate. A beat, then 2, then a third. Namtip screamed, "Stop!" The sound stopped. The woman tilted her head. From the corner of the room she heard a soft gasp. She turned. Her grandmother stood in the doorway, eyes sunken, lips trembling, skin pale as bone. She whispered only one thing, "She's not done," then collapsed. The villagers refused to help. "She should have stayed buried," one man muttered. "The girl stirred her," said another. No one would enter the house. Even the monks stopped coming. Namtip sat by her grandmother's side, wiping her fevered brow, listening to her mumble names she didn't know. Names of women, names of girls, names followed by numbers. The 2nd, the 3rd, the 6th, and then the 7th will walk soon. The faceless woman didn't come again, but others did. Namtip began to see them, in mirrors, in puddles, in windows at night, figures half-formed, mouths sewn shut, eyes gouged out, necks twisted at unnatural angles. Each night a different one, each night a little closer. And in the center of it all, always, sat the drum, quiet, listening, waiting. By the end of the week, a child went missing. The villagers searched the hills, the temple, the paddies, but Namtip already knew where she would be. She followed the footprints through the mud, small, barefoot, zigzagging through the fog, until they ended at the banyan tree. There, nestled at the base, was a new clay doll. It had the child's name carved into it, and its face was blank.
The banyan tree was silent, but the ground beneath it breathed. Namthip stood over the freshly placed clay doll, the one carved with the name of the missing child, and felt a sick heaviness in her chest. The doll's face was blank, like the woman's. Its eyes had never existed, but something behind them stared back. She stepped closer, but the moment her fingers brushed the clay, a warm trickle slid down her palm. Blood. Thin and bright, not hers. It leaked from the doll's belly like a cut that wouldn't close. Namthip stumbled back. The earth beneath her feet was wet. She looked down. The soil had darkened, soaked not with rain, but with something thicker. She ran. When she returned to the house, her grandmother was awake, but different. The fever was gone. The color had returned to her face, but her eyes no longer saw the room. They stared beyond it, through it. Namthip sat beside her, gripping her hand. "Halmoni," she whispered, voice cracking. "She's not just a spirit, she's not done." The old woman didn't speak at first. Then, with a slow turn of her head, she whispered something in a language Namthip didn't know. Not Thai, not Northern, something older. Her breath was shallow. Her fingers clutched the edge of Namthip's sleeve as if afraid to let go. Namthip yeaned in. "Tell me what I need to do." Her grandmother's voice was barely audible. "Give back what was taken." That night, a trail of feathers led to her doorstep. Chicken feathers, dozens of them. Some slick with blood, others caked in black mud. At the end of the trail lay 3 dead chickens, twisted into impossible shapes, their heads spun completely backward, beaks jammed open, eyes wide and glassy. Their blood had been used to paint symbols across the wood of the house, spirals, eyes, teeth. And in the center of the altar, someone had placed another doll. This one bore Namthip's name again. But now the face was not blank. It was hers, carved in detail, mouth open, eyes wide with fear. The temple bells rang that night, 3 times, but no one was there to ring them. Namthip walked to the edge of the rice field, guided by instinct more than reason. The moon hung low and yellow, bloated and heavy. The air smelled of rot and copper. At the far end of the field, a shaman stood with his back to her. He wore a tattered white robe, his head covered by a red cloth tied tightly around his skull. In his hand, he held a bundle of bones, tied with red thread and dripping wet. When Namthip stepped closer, he didn't turn. "You've started what cannot be stopped," he said. "I didn't mean to. The drum doesn't care what you meant." He raised the bundle and cast it into the flooded paddy. The bones sank without a sound. "7 beats call 7 spirits, each bound to the one they followed in death." Namthip swallowed hard. Who were they? The shaman lowered his head. "Those who loved her, those who betrayed her, those who buried her without prayer." He turned to face her.
His eyes were blind, but they looked directly into her. The seventh was a child. The villagers had begun their own rituals. Namthip watched from the shadows as they lit small fires at the edge of their homes, whispered into jars filled with charcoal and salt, and hammered iron nails into the base of trees. They weren't trying to banish the spirit. They were trying to redirect it, send it away from themselves, away from their homes, toward hers. In the morning, she woke to find red footprints on the floor. Small ones, barefoot, trailing from the front door to the altar and back again. Each step left behind a faint wetness that smelled of metal and rain. And next to the drum, now unwrapped and warm to the touch, lay a single offering, a severed tongue, still fresh, wrapped in banana leaf. Namthip didn't cry anymore. The fear had mutated into something else, a grim acceptance, a pull. She knelt before the altar and whispered, "What do you want?" The air shifted. Behind her, the door creaked open. A woman stepped inside. The same one. Soaked silk robes, hair down to her waist, face hidden in shadow. Namthip didn't run. She stayed kneeling. "I know your name, Rune," she said. The spirit twitched. The walls groaned. A painting fell. "You were my grandmother's sister. You died wrongly." Rune stepped closer. "You were buried without a name, without prayer, without love." The spirit's hands trembled at her sides. Water dripped from her fingers to the floor. Namthip raised her head. "I will remember you. I will give you back your name." Then, almost tenderly, Rune lifted one hand, the nails blackened, the fingers half rotted, and brushed them across Namthip's cheek. Her skin burned where they touched, but she didn't move. And then Rune whispered for the first time, "Blood for blood." That night, a child's body was found in the temple garden. Eyes sewn shut, fingernails missing, a symbol etched in her chest, the same spiral drawn on Namthip's wall in chicken blood. The monks closed the temple. No chants were sung. No bells rang. Namthip stood outside the gate as the sun set, holding Rune's name like a weight in her throat. She wasn't just calling her now. She was becoming her. She returned home and stood before the drum, alone, and in one sharp motion, driven not by grief this time but fury, she struck it. Once, twice, a third time. The house rattled, the air thickened, the candle flame stretched into long white fingers. A fourth, a fifth, the drum vibrated with heat, blood seeped from the seams in its hide. A sixth, and then, with both hands shaking, Namthip raised the stick one last time and struck the seventh beat. Nothing happened at first, just silence. Then the house began to cry, a deep, low wailing, not from walls or roof, but from the earth itself. The floorboards bowed upward, the window shattered inward, the drum split open along its center. Inside was something wrapped in red cloth. Namthip reached forward, hands trembling, and peeled the cloth away. Bones, small, delicate, child-sized. Wrapped around them was a lock of hair, and a note, ancient, water-stained, barely legible, but the name was clear. Rune. Outside, the villagers were lighting another fire, another ward, another offering. Namthip stood outside as the sun set, holding the bones in her arms, her dress soaked in the drum's blood, her hands shaking but steady. She walked through the fog to the base of the banyan tree. There, she laid the bones gently into the soil. She whispered Rune's name 7 times, and as she spoke the 7th, the wind stopped, the fog stilled, the earth sighed, not in pain, but in relief. But from behind the tree, something else emerged, a figure, short, small, a child, with no eyes and a mouth sewn shut. The 7th spirit had arrived, and it wasn't looking for peace. It was looking for the next offering.
Rain fell for the first time in weeks, but it wasn't a relief. It came like morning, a cold, steady drizzle that soaked the earth without washing anything away. The sky remained gray, the wind was silent, and beneath the banyan tree, the bones of Ruan lay buried, freshly returned to the soil that once condemned her. Namtip hadn't moved from the spot. Her knees were numb. Her palms were stained red from the drum's blood, from the bone's decay, from the weight of something no one else dared carry. Around her, the earth had grown quiet, not in peace, but in reverence, like the land itself understood what had been unearthed. The drum no longer sang, but its silence was not rest. It was waiting. Namtip returned to the house long after the rain stopped. The floor was wet, the windows were cracked, but the house stood barely, as though Ruan's spirit had spared it, for now. Her grandmother was awake again, lucid but pale. Her eyes held the weight of something long hidden. She sat by the altar, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the ashes of the incense. Namtip knelt beside her. "You knew," she said, "didn't you?" Her grandmother didn't answer. "You had a sister, Ruan, and she was—" "I had no sister." The old woman's voice was brittle. Namtip stared at her. "They executed her, here, in this village." "She brought shame. She brought vengeance." A long silence passed between them. Outside, thunder rumbled. Then, soft as prayer, her grandmother spoke. "They said she loved a man already promised to another. Said she was seen at night with him near the temple, barefoot, hair loose, unclean. She swore it wasn't true. But back then, the word of a man weighed more than the silence of a girl. The elders held a cleansing, a purification rite, the kind that wipes away impurity by fire or by blood." Namtip swallowed. "You let them kill her!" The old woman's hands trembled. "I was a child. I watched from the doorway. My mother screamed and screamed, but no one listened. They said it had to be done, that she brought spirits into the village, that her womb was cursed." Her voice cracked. "We never buried her properly. Her name was never spoken again." Namtip felt cold all over. The drum, the dolls, the deaths, all of it was not a haunting. It was a debt. A forgotten daughter denied her name, denied her rest, and Namtip had called her home. That night, the fog returned, heavier than ever. But this time, it came with faces. Namtip saw them outside the window, pressed against the glass, fogging it with breaths that no longer came from lungs. Pale faces, child faces, elderly faces, all with eyes sealed, mouths stitched, some missing parts, but all watching. And in the center of them, Ruan. Not faceless anymore. Now her face was complete, but twisted. Her skin sagged like waterlogged paper. Her eyes bled. Her mouth smiled too wide. But behind the horror was something deeper. Recognition. She had been remembered. She had been returned.
but not released. The next morning, Namtip sought out the village records. She went to the locked building behind the temple, a bamboo archive sealed with a rusted padlock and dust-heavy chains. No one dared enter it, but the key had been left hanging, hidden behind the offering shelf. Inside, it smelled of rotting paper and forgotten names. She flipped through scrolls, birth ledgers, death logs, most crumbling at the edges, ink faded. Pages filled with neat lines, daughters born, sons taken for ordination, women married off, widows listed with no children. And then she found it. A page torn at the corner, dated August 1941. 2 names. Ruan Sitiang, female, age 17, deceased. Cause of death? Unrecorded. Body unreturned. Next to the entry, someone had scribbled a single word. Ap Mongol. Unclean. She took the page to the young monk. He read it with no expression. Then he knelt, bowed, and whispered a mantra under his breath. She was erased, Namtip said. Even her body wasn't given back. The monk looked up. That's why she cannot leave. Namtip's voice broke. What do I do? He closed the book gently. You must give her the rights she was denied. The chant, the offering, the name. He hesitated. And then you must burn what's left of the drum. Namtip flinched. But it belongs to her. It also binds her here. It is not only a tool of calling, it is a vessel. She looked down at the book in her hands. The paper seemed to hum. She's still inside it, she whispered. The monk nodded. That evening, she returned home and opened the drum again. The hide peeled back like skin. Inside, the remains were blackened now, wet from the rain but still heavy with memory. Charred cloth, cracked bones, teeth embedded in rotted wood. Namtip didn't flinch. She gathered the remains in a bowl and placed them on the altar. She lit 7 sticks of incense, 1 for each spirit. She sprinkled water from the temple well, water once blessed, now clouded, and she spoke Ruan's name. Once, twice, 3 times. By the 7th, the candles extinguished themselves. The air grew thick, and Ruan stood behind her. She didn't appear like before, not dripping, not faceless. Now she looked like a girl, 17, barefoot, hair tied back in silk, hands folded in her lap, but her eyes still bled. Namtip knelt. I'm sorry, she said. You were silenced, shamed, abandoned, but I see you now. I know your name. She picked up the chant, not from memory, but from something deeper, like the words were stitched into her blood. She spoke the funeral rite line by line, voice shaking, tears falling. She burned Ruan's remains with sandalwood and river bark, and when the fire took hold, the girl began to cry, but not in pain, in release. As the smoke rose, the other spirits came forward, each one stepping from the walls, the floors, the shadows. They formed a circle around the flame. The child, the blind woman, the man with no hands, the old one with the caved-in skull. Each one bowed, each one wept, and then, one by one, they turned and walked into the fog, vanishing like mist in morning light. All except Ruan. She turned to Namtip. Her mouth moved, and though no sound came, Namtip understood. Thank you. But it is not over. Then she was gone. When morning came, the fog had lifted. For the first time in weeks, the village breathed. The air smelled of rain and burnt offerings. Chickens crowed, doors creaked open. But something had shifted. Namtip stood outside her home, barefoot in the dew. She looked down at her arms. The bruises had faded. The tremble in her hands was gone. But inside her chest, the drum still beat. Soft, slow, faint. She turned toward the banyan tree. At its base, where Ruan had been buried, the earth was scorched black, and from the soil, something had begun to grow. A flower, white, delicate, blooming only under shadow. A funeral blossom, a sign that one soul had passed on. But others were still waiting.
In the days that followed the burning of Ruan's remains, Ban Na Suang held its breath. The fog receded, the rain stopped. The earth, long soaked in silence and rot, began to breathe again. Chickens crowed in the distance. The temple reopened, and villagers, once silent and watchful, emerged like ghosts returning to the land of the living. But Namtip knew better. This was not peace. This was a pause, the kind you hear between beats of a drum. And someone, was still listening. She first noticed it in the shadows of the house, tiny things, shapes that didn't belong, eyes that watched from places where no eyes should be. At first, she thought it was the weight of trauma. Echoes of Ruan burned into memory. But the feeling didn't fade, it grew. And then the whispers began. Not voices, not words, just clay rubbing against clay. Soft grinding, like wet earth being shaped by invisible hands. She followed the sound one morning and found them, tucked inside the old armoire in her grandmother's bedroom, beneath folded funeral robes and yellowed photographs. Clay dolls, dozens of them. Some old and cracked, others fresh, the clay still moist. Each no taller than a teacup, each carved in a kneeling position, heads bowed, mouths open in silent scream. And each one bore a name. The names were carved in neat, deliberate strokes. Ruan, Namtip, Pin Chanok, Sutep, Lalisa, Pawina. Some were family, others villagers long gone, and a few, horrifyingly, still alive. At the bottom of the pile, Namtip found a doll with no name. Its face was missing, as if never finished, a blank head atop a kneeling body. She reached for it. The moment her fingers touched the clay, a sound filled the room. A breath, drawn in, not by her, but by the doll. Then a whisper, "She's not alone." Namtip dropped it. The doll landed with a heavy thud and shattered in two. Inside the broken halves was something black and writhing. Hair, coiled and damp as if freshly plucked from a living scalp. She burned the dolls in the fire pit behind the house, every last one. The heat cracked their bodies, turned the clay black, but as the flames consumed them, the air filled with the sound of murmuring, voices, dozens, all whispering different things, some prayers, some curses, some simply repeating the same word. Why? 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 Namtip screamed into the flames, "I don't know!" And for a moment, the flare flared white. Then silence. But she knew they weren't gone, only watching from a new place.
Her grandmother grew weaker. By now she barely spoke. Her eyes stared at corners, at ceilings, at things no one else could see. Nam Tip cared for her as best she could, but she knew the time was short. The old woman had refused to confess, refused to speak Ruan's name again, and now the spirits were circling, hungry, not just for vengeance, for acknowledgement. The young monk returned one morning. He stood at the edge of the yard, hands clasped, eyes lowered. He felt it. You gave Ruan rest. I tried. He looked toward the house. She wasn't the only one they condemned. Nam Tip nodded slowly. There are others. He walked with her to the temple wall, the one with the mural of the funeral rites. She hadn't noticed before, but there was a patch where the paint had peeled, revealing a second layer underneath. He scraped gently with his fingernail. Beneath the paint were more women, painted over, erased, each with the same bowed head, same stitched mouth, same funeral robe soaked in black. The monk whispered, "This village has buried many daughters in silence." Nam Tip returned home and began digging, not into the earth, but into the house itself. She tore open the floorboards again, this time in the rooms left untouched, her grandfather's study, the sealed pantry, the stairwell cupboard, and in each one she found another doll. Some buried, some hidden in jars, some placed inside the walls, wrapped in banana leaf, mouths stuffed with red thread. These were not mere talismans, they were bindings. Each one sealed a name, each one silenced a voice. And with each doll she uncovered, the whispering grew louder. That night she didn't sleep. The dolls surrounded the house now, placed by someone, something, lined up outside the windows, beneath the roof eaves, circling the banyan tree like mourners. They were watching. She lit incense and sat before the altar. "Show me," she whispered. The candle flickered, then went out. And in the dark, the dolls began to speak, not in unison, but one by one, each in a different tone, a different language, a different age. I was 10. I was a bride. I was promised. I was blamed. I was forgotten. The voices echoed through her chest, through her bones. Then louder, more insistent. We were never given rights. Nam Tip screamed into the dark, "I will give them to you." Silence. Then a single doll rose on its own. It hovered in the air, began to spin, and whispered, "Then start with me." The next day, Nam Tip prepared the first ritual. She took the doll, the nameless one, and built a pyre behind the house. She gathered 7 kinds of incense, drew the cleansing spiral with white ash, and spoke the funeral chant she had learned from Ruan's rite. As the doll burned, the flames turned blue, the air shifted, and in the smoke, a face appeared. A girl, young, shy, eyes wide, but no longer empty. She smiled and vanished. That night, 2 more dolls rose. Nam Tip performed the rite again, then again. Each time the flame burned in different colors, red, green, silver. Each time a new face, and each one leaving. But for every doll that found peace, 3 more appeared. The cycle was endless. The house, once haunted by one spirit, now whispered with the weight of many. Not all of them wanted to go. By the 5th night, Nam Tip's voice had grown hoarse. The chants hurt her throat. Her hands were blistered from firewood. Her sleep came in snatches, filled with dreams of rivers, blood, broken teeth, drums made of skin. And the whispering never stopped. It followed her into dreams, into silence, into breath. Even the banyan tree had begun to bleed, red sap leaking from its trunk, seeping into the roots, staining the ground with grief. She couldn't keep up. She was drowning in the dead. And then the final doll arrived. She found it on her pillow, larger than the others, carved with exquisite detail, and on its face was her grandmother's. Namtip turned to the bed. The old woman lay still, eyes open wide, mouth slightly parted. But she wasn't breathing.
The candlelight flickered low as Namthip knelt beside her grandmother's body. The old woman had died with her eyes open, staring at the altar as if seeing something that had finally arrived. Her lips were parted, and a trail of ash ran from the corner of her mouth to her chin, as if she'd spoken her last breath into dust. In her hand, clenched so tightly her fingernails had drawn blood, was the clay doll, the one that bore her own face. Namthip didn't scream. She didn't cry. She only bowed her head and whispered the first line of the chant. For Ruin, for the girl, for the grandmother who'd carried her silence like a coffin. And when she finished the 7th verse, the flame bent sideways and extinguished itself without wind. The next night, the first spirit arrived. Namthip didn't see her at first, only heard the sound of dripping water and the faint tap-tap-tap of fingernails against wood. She followed the sound into the bathing room, where the floor was soaked with black water. Floating in the tub, curled like a child in sleep, was a girl with soaked robes and torn fingernails. Her face was calm, until she opened her mouth. No sound came, only blood. It poured out like a stream, flooding the tub, reaching the floor, running between the slats like red veins. Namthip reached for the incense and began the chant. The girl didn't move. But when the 7th line was spoken, her eyes filled with tears and then burst into light. She vanished, and the water receded. The 2nd night came with fire. Namthip awoke to the smell of smoke, but there was no blaze, only a woman standing at the threshold of the house, wrapped in a scorched bridal veil, her body charred but still standing. Her fingers had fused together, her lips had burned away, but her eyes were full of rage. Namthip barely managed to light the candles before the spirit stepped inside. She began the chant, but the flame would not hold. Each time she reached the 5th verse, the candle died. The woman advanced, smoke curling from her mouth, her bones crackling as she walked. Namthip fell to her knees and screamed Ruin's name. That broke the silence. The woman halted, shook, then turned to ash. The 3rd night, a child came, a boy no older than 5. He crawled through the rice fields with shattered knees, dragging a red string behind him, the same kind Ruin had been bound in. Namthip found him sitting in the altar room, rocking slowly, eyes hollow, mouth shown shut. She didn't speak. She simply held out her hand. The child placed the red string in her palm and vanished without needing a word. The 4th spirit came headless. Namthip heard it before she saw it, the sound of something wet being dragged across wood. She turned the corner and saw a woman crawling on all fours, her neck a stump of flesh, her hands bent backward at the wrists. Namthip lit the candle, voice shaking. May your pain be lifted. May your name be remembered. But the woman didn't stop. Namthip backed away, chanting louder. The headless spirit leapt, not at her, but at the drum. She slammed her hands down on the skin.
The drum let out a groan, and the spirit froze, then burst into a cloud of smoke that screamed. By the 5th night, Namthip had stopped counting hours. The house no longer felt like hers. The air buzzed with chanting that didn't come from her mouth. The dolls reappeared every morning, circling her bed. The altar wept sap. She barely slept, barely ate, only waited. And when night came, the 5th spirit came with it. He was different. A man, tall, stooped, eyes missing, his tongue tied around his neck like a noose. He didn't speak. He simply stood beside her bed, breathing through his wounds. Namthip didn't light a candle. Instead, she sat up, unwrapped her grandmother's talisman, and placed it at his feet. "You were innocent. I speak your name." The spirit shook, then bent forward and bowed, a gesture of thanks. Then he was gone. The 6th spirit came screaming. She was wild, teeth bared, skin flayed open across her arms, her body covered in ritual tattoos carved with knives. She burst through the window. Namthip screamed and ran, but the spirit followed, fast, twisted, grinning. This one didn't want release. She wanted revenge. Namthip dropped to the ground, crawling toward the altar, searching for the chant scrolls. But the spirit struck her across the face, knocking her back. Then she stopped, frozen mid-lunge. Behind her stood Ruin, still, calm, silent. Ruin raised one hand, and the spirit dissolved, not in light, but in dust. Namthip looked up. Ruin stared down at her and whispered, "Only one left." Namthip barely made it through the day. Her body ached, her soul felt frayed, but she knew what was coming. The 7th night, the 7th spirit, the one the others feared, the one Ruin had warned her about. It came after midnight. There was no wind, no sound, only a knock. Not at the door, not on the windows, but beneath the floorboards. 7 knocks, then silence. Namthip stepped into the altar room and saw her. The girl, small, dressed in white. Her face was turned away. She sat cross-legged, back straight, hair tied in red ribbon. A doll lay in her lap, made of human bone. Namthip didn't speak. She knew this one couldn't be rushed. She lit the 7 candles, one by one. She bowed, and she whispered, "May your soul return to peace. May your name return to dust. May the silence be broken." The spirit screamed, a sound not of rage, but of relief, and then vanished. The light died, and the dolls turned to ash. In the aftermath, Namthip stood in silence. The altar was gone. The drum split in two. The banyan tree wept clear sap, not blood. The village stirred, and dawn finally came with warmth. But deep in the earth, beneath the house, 7 symbols burned faintly in the soil, glowing red like embers, waiting. It was the first clear morning in nearly a month. The sky above Ban Na Swang was a muted silver, not quite sunlit, not quite storming, the kind of sky that felt like it was waiting for something to end or begin. Namthip stepped barefoot into the soft soil behind the house, where the ashes of the shattered drum still smoldered. The earth was blackened, cracked with dried sap,
and the faint outline of 7 burned sigils. But the air smelled cleaner now. The whispering had stopped. For the first time in weeks, there were no dolls waiting on her doorstep, no footsteps outside her window, no blood in the bathwater, only silence. But it didn't feel safe. It felt like the calm between monsoon rains, the space where the wind holds its breath just before the world breaks open again. The village had changed, slightly. Doors now opened during the day. Children returned to the temple yard. Chickens wandered without running in circles. But their eyes avoided Namtip. She walked through the market like a shadow, and people parted around her. Not in fear, not in anger, but in reverence, like a living relic of something they didn't want to remember and couldn't afford to forget. And then came the whispers, this time not from the dead, from the living. She finished it. The spirits are gone. The drum's broken. It's safe now. She should leave. Namtip did not argue, but she did not leave, because in her heart the beat hadn't stopped. It had simply gone deeper. And that night, the wind returned. The next morning, the monks announced the ceremony of farewell, a ritual meant to cleanse the village of lingering echoes, a formal act, an old rite. They would launch a funeral boat made of banana leaves, white cloth, and incense. Inside it would be the names of the departed, burned and folded, carried down the river as an offering to the wandering dead. Everyone was required to attend, especially Namtip, because as they said behind her back, she opened the gate, let her close it. She arrived at the river at twilight. The banks were lined with villagers dressed in white, holding incense and lotus flowers. The air shimmered with smoke. The water reflected the pale fire of dusk. In the center of the crowd stood the boat, wide and delicate, shaped like a swan, its paper wings spread high. Dozens of scrolls had been placed inside. Namtip stepped forward, holding her own. The name on it was simple, Ruin. She laid it atop the others. The head monk stepped forward, holding a candle. But before he could light the vessel, the sky changed. A wind rose, sudden, strong. It spun the smoke backward, scattered petals into the river, bent flames sideways. The crowd murmured, and then, across the water, a sound echoed. Tap, tap, tap. Not from drums, from bare feet slapping against wood. Namtip's heart froze. A figure appeared at the far end of the riverbank, half shrouded in mist, stepping slowly across the footbridge. It was a woman, white robes, wet hair, pale feet caked in soil. And as she stepped forward, her mouth opened. The head monk raised his hand to begin the chant, but her mouth opened wider, and then he screamed. He fell to his knees, eyes rolling back, foam forming at the corners of his lips. His voice twisted into a rasp, and then into something entirely else. You silenced me with rope. You buried me in shame. You watched me burn and did not speak. It was Ruin's voice, but it came from the monk's mouth. Namtip rushed forward. The villagers backed away, some dropping their incense, others muttering old prayers. The possessed monk turned to her, his face contorted, but his eyes were Ruin's. Tears ran from them, not in pain, but in recognition. Namtip fell to her knees. I'm here. I gave you fire, I gave you name. The monk's head snapped to the sky.
but not release. Then his body went limp. He collapsed beside the riverbank, and the funeral boat, without warning, ignited. Blue flames erupted from the scrolls. The boat didn't float gently. It shot forward as if pushed, cutting across the water like a possessed creature. The fire rose taller than it should, burning without consuming, casting twisted shadows against the trees. And then, from the center of the river, she rose. Not Ruen, the seventh spirit, the child, the one with the blank eyes and perfect face. She stood atop the water, barefoot, untouched by flame. And she pointed, not at the boat, not at Namtip, but at the crowd. And the boat exploded. Screams rang out as shards of flame scattered across the riverbank. Some caught in hair, some in robes. No one burned, but everyone fled. All except Namtip. She stood alone, covered in ash, staring at the girl standing atop the river. She said, "Why?" The girl didn't speak. She only smiled, and then whispered in Ruen's voice, "Because not all souls want peace. Some want to be known. Some want to be followed." Then she sank into the water. The river stilled, the fire vanished, and the wind stopped. The villagers called it a bad omen. They accused Namtip of interfering with the old ways, of performing rituals without permission, of breaking what was never meant to be unbound. But none of them would speak Ruen's name, not even now. Namtip stayed by the river long after they left. She sat among the floating ashes, watching them drift downriver, wondering how far they would go before disappearing, and whether any of the names written on the scrolls had truly reached the other side. That night, she dreamed of the monk. He sat beneath the banyan tree, his robes soaked in blood, his hands folded in prayer. He looked up at her, face calm. But when he spoke, it was Ruen's voice again. "You gave them fire. Now give them light, not for their peace, for yours." Namtip woke with the taste of river water in her mouth. She returned to the altar room the next morning. It was empty. The broken drum was gone. The walls were clean. But on the floor, drawn in red thread, was a new spiral. At its center was a clay doll. This one was different. No name, no face, but carved in its chest were 7 tiny notches, each notch pulsed with light. Namtip picked it up. It was warm, and it was breathing. She took the doll to the banyan tree and buried it. No fire, no chant, no ceremony, just silence. And as she placed the final handful of soil over it, a breeze lifted the leaves. Not cold, not foreboding, just still, balanced, for now.
The wind did not return, nor the spirits, nor the fog, nor the fire. For 3 days Ban Na Swang was silent, not with peace, but with unease, as if the land had exhaled something foul and was now waiting to see what would fill the space it left behind. Namtip wandered the village like a ghost in her own skin. The people no longer avoided her. They simply pretended she wasn't there. She watched them hang talismans over their doors, watched them pour rice into jars buried at the edge of their land, watched them chant under their breath as she passed. The message was clear. We let her survive. Now she must not stir what sleeps. But Namtip could feel it. There was still something beneath the surface, unfinished. She had freed Ruen, burned the dolls, faced the 7, but something still whispered at the edge of sleep, and it wasn't asking for a name. It was asking for a door. She returned to the house. The broken altar was gone. The clay had crumbled. The sigils had faded from the floor. But the silence inside the walls wasn't empty. It was listening. She entered her grandmother's room, untouched since the night of her death. The photo of Ruin lay face down on the table. Namtip turned it over. Ruin's face was clear now, no longer blurred, no longer blank. Her eyes stared back with something unreadable. Not anger, not peace, just waiting. Namtip opened the floorboards one last time. The drum's remnants were gone, burned, scattered. But underneath, wrapped in a red silk cloth she had never seen before, was a second drumstick, smoother, polished, heavier in the hand, not used for funerals, used for summonings. She carried it to the field. At the base of the banyan tree, she knelt and waited until nightfall. The sky turned violet. The wind held its breath. She stared into the shadows and whispered, "You're still here, aren't you?" Nothing moved. "You showed me the 7. I burned the dolls. I gave you fire. What more do you want?" Still the night stayed silent. Then, just as she stood to leave, the wind returned, hot, unnatural, dry. It whispered one word, "One more." Namtip knew the warnings. The monk had said it. 7 beats opened 7 gates. Each drumbeat was a call, a tether, a sacrifice. But the 8th? The 8th was forbidden. It was said to call what even the spirits feared, not the dead, but the unborn, not ghosts, but echoes, souls that had never been spoken of, sins buried so deep that they had no name. Namtip returned to the house. She rebuilt the altar with shaking hands, laid out 7 candles, but she brought no drum, only the drumstick and the floor. At midnight, she struck the wood. Once, the house shuddered. Twice, the air grew dense, humid, heavy. 3, the shadows moved. 4, a wail echoed from beneath the earth. 5, the windows cracked. 6, the altar caught flame, not red, but black fire. 7, the earth beneath her split. And then, 8. The sound wasn't loud. It was deep, like something being pulled from beneath the roots of the world. And then the house breathed. All at once, inhale, hold, and then screaming, not from her, from the walls, from the soil, from the space between seconds. The house twisted, the ceiling bent inward, blood oozed from the floorboards, and something began to rise. She saw it first in the mirror, not a person, a shape, tall, pale, faceless, its body wrapped in soaked white cloth, stained with symbols she didn't recognize. Where hands should be, there were roots. Where a mouth should be, a black knot of thread. And where its heart should be, a hole, empty, waiting. It stepped forward, and from everywhere at once, voices whispered, "You beat the drum. You opened the door. Now something must stay." Namtip backed into the altar. Her body shook, her eyes burned. "What are you?" The figure tilted its head. "The one left behind." Then it raised one hand, and the floor opened beneath her. She fell, not far, but deep, into memory. She saw Ruin, tied to the banyan tree, screaming as villagers threw salt and ash into her mouth. She saw the head monk, younger, binding the hands of a sobbing child who begged to be heard. She saw her grandmother, a girl,
hiding behind the temple curtain, clutching a doll she would later bury. And then she saw herself, small, crying, holding her mother's scarf, alone, always alone. She awoke, gasping. The house was gone. She stood in the middle of the rice field, barefoot, covered in ash. The banyan tree had withered. Its leaves were gone, its bark cracked open, and nailed to its base was a clay doll, larger than the rest, wearing her face. She took it down, cradled it in her arms. It was warm, alive. It whispered in her voice, "Let me stay, let me stay, let me stay." Namtip shook her head. "No, you're not me." The doll grinned, and its mouth began to open. Inside were teeth. She ran to the riverbank. The waters were low. She lit the final scroll, one she had kept hidden all this time, her own name. She placed the doll inside, set it afloat, watched the flame refuse to catch, watched the river carry it halfway before it sank. Not gone, just waiting. Namtip fell to her knees. There were no more chants, no more rites, no more drumbeats, only the sound of water swallowing what she had tried to forget. And in the trees above her, something began to hum, a lullaby, her mother's voice, or something pretending. She didn't turn to look, because she already knew. The 8th beat had opened more than a door. It had invited something to stay.
The river was quiet, too quiet. Namtip sat on the muddy bank, knees hugged to her chest, eyes unfocused as the current moved without sound. The last of the doll's ashes had disappeared beneath the black surface hours ago, and yet the chill of it still clung to her skin, as if the water had whispered secrets to her bones. The air smelled of wet leaves and something sweet, something familiar. Lavender, her mother's scent. She froze. Behind her, footsteps, soft, steady, slow, padded across the dirt path. No dragging, no stagger, no rot. Just presence. Alive. She turned. And there she was. Her mother. Whole. Breathing. Wearing the same sky blue blouse she was cremated in. Her skin smooth. Her hair still tied in the way Namtip remembered. Loose but elegant. There was no mist. No blood. No trembling. Only a smile. "Thip," the woman said, voice warm and steady. "You look so tired, my girl." Namtip couldn't breathe. "Ma?" The woman stepped forward. Her feet left footprints in the mud, real ones. Namtip stumbled upright. Her heart thundered in her chest. Tears spilled before she could even form the next word. Is it really you?" Her mother nodded. "I've been waiting. But you had to finish the rites first. You had to open the path." Namtip reached for her, and her hand was warm. They walked together through the rice fields, side by side, the air filled with the faint buzz of dragonflies and soft wind. "I tried to talk to you, back in the house. I heard your voice through the drum." Her mother smiled faintly. "It wasn't safe yet." Namthip's chest tightened. "Why now?" "Because the others are gone, the angry ones, the forgotten ones. But I stayed, for you."
They stopped beneath the banyan tree. The scorched bark had healed. The leaves had returned, green and full, as if death had been reversed. Namthip placed a hand against the trunk. "Everything's different now." Her mother said nothing. Namthip turned to face her and for the first time noticed something wrong. Her mother's blouse. It was the same, but the buttons were reversed. Left over right. Namthip blinked. She remembered dressing her mother's body, placing the blouse with trembling hands. The buttons had gone right over left. Her mother was right-handed. This version was not. Her breathing slowed. "Ma?" she whispered. "What was the lullaby you used to sing to me?" Her mother smiled wider. "You remember?" "No, I want to hear it from you." The woman tilted her head, then began to hum. It was the tune, but it was wrong. One note too sharp, another too slow, a pause where there should have been a word. Namthip stepped back. "That's not it." Her mother's eyes changed, just slightly. The kindness didn't fade, but the warmth behind it turned hollow. "You're tired. Come with me. I've made your room. You can sleep. You don't need to carry it anymore." Namthip turned to run, but the woman grabbed her wrist, and this time the skin beneath her grip was cold. The voice that came next was not her mother's. "You called me." Namthip gasped. The river behind them surged, suddenly, violently, as if something massive moved beneath the surface. The sky darkened, the banyan tree groaned, and the woman's face melted. Not in blood, not in rot, in clay. It cracked, crumbled, and revealed what lay beneath. A smooth, blank surface. No eyes, no mouth, just an echo. A doll with legs. Namthip screamed. She tore her arm free and ran, her feet slipping in the mud as thunder rolled in from nowhere. She didn't stop until she reached the temple. The monks saw her bloodied hands, her tear-streaked face. They did not ask. The young monk took her inside and lit candles along the edges of the shrine. "You saw her," he said. Namthip nodded. "She wasn't your mother," he said gently. "Not anymore. Whatever came through the 8th beat, it knows what you want." Namthip collapsed to her knees. "I wanted it to be her. I wanted one moment, one hug." The monk lowered his head. "That's what it feeds on." She looked up. "There's still something left inside the banyan tree." That night, she returned. Alone. The moon was full, the air still. She carried no drum, no chant, no candle. Only her mother's scarf. She tied it to the base of the banyan tree. "I release you," she whispered. "Whatever you are, whatever part of her you used, you don't belong here." The leaves above trembled, and from the soil a hand emerged. Small, pale, fingerless. It reached once, twitched, then crumbled into ash. Namthip fell back, heart hammering. The scarf fluttered in the wind. And then the banyan tree exhaled. When she returned to the house, the floor had shifted again. A new set of footprints, tiny, clay-soaked, led from the altar to her bedroom. She followed them. There, in the center of her pillow, was a final doll. No face, no name, just the scent of lavender. She lit one last candle, held the doll over the flame, and whispered, "You are not my mother, but you taught me how to let her go." She dropped the doll into the fire, watched it crack, splinter, collapse. The flame turned purple, then blue, then disappeared without smoke. In the silence that followed, she heard a lullaby. This time, the right tune, every note true, every pause familiar. She didn't know if it was real, but she let it wash over her. Because this one felt like goodbye.
The rain returned the next morning. Not a storm, just a slow, steady mist that soaked the earth without urgency. The kind of rain that feels like memory, not weather. The kind that doesn't wash things clean, only makes the stains sink deeper. Nam Thip stood barefoot in the center of the altar room, her skin chilled, her fingers stiff from the cold. The candle had burned out hours ago, but the scent of lavender still hung in the air. The final doll was gone, but its absence didn't bring closure. It brought weight. There was still something beneath it all, under the drums, under the chants, under the rituals and salt and blood. Something no one had dared name, not even Ruen. She returned to the temple, soaked through, her clothes clinging to her skin. The young monk met her at the gates. "You're not finished," he said, before she even spoke. Nam Thip nodded. "I burned the dolls, the spirits passed, even Ruen found peace, but not you." She looked down. "Because I don't understand." The monk led her to the old archives, the ones the elders said were cursed, sealed decades ago with wax and rope. The scrolls inside had crumbled with time, their ink faded, their language even older than the village dialect. But one document remained intact, a page wrapped in silk. The monk unrolled it on the shrine floor, smoothing it carefully with calloused hands. The title was written in Lana script, barely legible. Kriang Putuam, the instrument of containment. A ritual, not for mourning, not for calling, but for binding. The story it told was older than Ban Na Swang, older than the country. It spoke of a woman born with a gift, or a curse, to hear the dead. A soul who could see spirits even before they formed. She was said to have delivered stillborns into the afterlife, whispered the names of murdered wives into the ears of monks, and watched funeral pyres to ensure souls didn't return. She was revered, then feared, then accused. And when the village elders couldn't explain a season of deaths, they bound her soul inside a drum, not to silence her, but to use her, to control death, to contain it. 7 beats, 7 spirits, all tied to her pain. And if an 8th was struck, the binding would break, and the original soul, the woman, would return, not in body, but in voice. Nam Thip stared at the scroll until her vision blurred. She wasn't just a victim, she was a vessel, she whispered. The monk looked up. She was Ruen's ancestor. Nam Thip turned to him, heart sinking. "What?" He unrolled the final part of the parchment. A family tree, sketched by hand, incomplete, but clear enough. And at the very bottom, Namthip's name. "I'm the end of the line," she said that night, sitting beneath the banyan tree. Ruen had been the seventh, the last known vessel, but her death had only delayed the ritual, not ended it. Namthip had not just inherited a bloodline, she had inherited a purpose, to finish the rite or to break it, and that meant going deeper. She returned to the ruins of the drum, not the pieces, those had been burned, but the place, the space beneath the floorboards where the wood still smelled of death and the soil still breathed heat. She dug with her hands, past dust, past memory, past fear, until her fingers struck something hard. A box, stone, sealed with wax. She pried it open. Inside, a tongue, wrapped in red cloth, dried, preserved, female. And beneath it, a note, faded, barely legible, but still readable. To silence the voice, bury the breath. But the voice never dies, it only hides, waiting for the blood to speak. That night the voice returned, not Ruen, the woman, the first. Namthip felt her before she heard her, a pressure in her lungs, a heaviness behind the eyes. Then from the mirror, a figure, draped in white, hair tangled with bone, eyes sealed with thread. But her mouth moved. No sound escaped, only ash. It poured from her lips in slow spirals, painting words into the floor. Namthip read them out loud. "I was buried in silence. I was tied in song. I was made into a warning. You opened the drum. You called the beat. Now you must choose." The candle beside her ignited, not with fire, but with shadow. A second figure stepped forward. It was Ruen, still smiling, but thinner now, more distant. She stood beside the first woman, bowed her head, and whispered, "Let me finish it." Namthip shook her head. "No, that's not your burden anymore." Ruen raised her eyes, then disappeared. The first woman stepped closer, and finally she spoke. Her voice was inside Namthip's head. "Let the beat end." Namthip awoke in her bed, gasping. The morning sun pierced the windows for the first time in weeks. The air felt still, but in her hands was the box, the tongue inside still warm, still pulsing, still alive. She took it to the banyan tree, dug a hole beneath its roots, laid the tongue inside with the ashes of the drum, the remnants of the dolls, and the final candle. Then she lit it all, not with fire, with breath. A single whisper, "End it." The earth shook. The tree cracked open at its base, light spilling from inside like a second sunrise, and a voice echoed from deep below. "I hear you." Then silence. Not the silence of fear, the silence of rest. When Namthip returned to the village, the monks bowed as she passed. No one spoke, but someone had painted something on the temple wall. A new mural of a girl holding a drum, breaking it in two, and beneath it, 7 spirits walking into the mist. Namthip stood at the edge of the river that night, watching it flow quietly under moonlight. She no longer waited for voices, no longer feared shadows, but deep in her chest, she felt something else, a rhythm,
A memory, not a beat, a pulse, alive.
Bon Na Swang slept. Not the restless, watchful sleep of a haunted village, but the heavy stillness of a place that had finally stopped whispering. The fog never came back. The wind no longer carried voices. The banyan tree stood whole and quiet, its roots clean, its sap clear. And yet, deep in Namthip's chest, something pulsed. A rhythm without sound, a beat without drum, a silence that spoke. She had ended the rituals, burned the dolls, named the unnamed, buried the tongue. She had silenced the dead, but not the drum, because the drum had never lived in wood. It lived in her. She tried to return to normal life, woke with the sun, swept the altar room, ate warm rice on the steps like her grandmother used to. She even smiled at the villagers when they passed, and this time a few smiled back. But at night, when the house creaked in the wind, her breath would slow, her heartbeat would match that old familiar thump. She told herself it was memory, until the dream returned. She stood in a field of ash. The sky above her, black and low, pulsed like a lung. Before her, the drum sat whole again, carved with 7 symbols, and one new one, a spiral blooming outward, alive. Namthip stepped closer. She wasn't afraid. The drum didn't move, but behind it, a figure did. Ruen, her face calm, her robes clean, her eyes finally at peace. She said nothing, but lifted her hand and pointed, not at the drum, at Namthip. "You carry it now," a voice whispered. "The beat will never die, but it no longer needs to haunt. It can protect." Namthip reached out and touched the drum, and it vanished. She awoke with her palm pressed to her chest, and there, beneath skin and breath, was a single pulse, soft, steady, complete. Later that day, she returned to the riverbank. The villagers had gathered again, this time not for a funeral, not for a cleansing, for something new, a ceremony without name. An elder woman approached her with a bundle of cloth. Inside it, a scroll. Namthip unrolled it. Blank. A space for a name. Not of the dead, of the one who finished the story. "We want you to write it," the elder said, "so we do not forget again." Namthip wrote in careful strokes, "The drum that called the dead, and the girl who answered." She handed it back, and the villagers bowed. That night, she sat alone in the house. No incense, no chants, no candles, only her, and the silence. She placed her hand over her heart, felt the rhythm, and whispered, "I hear you, but I am not afraid." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but it brought no shadows, only leaves, only sleep. The final sign came in the morning. At the base of the banyan, where she had buried the last remnants of the curse, a new bloom had opened. Not a lotus, not a funeral flower, but a seedling she didn't recognize, tall, silver-veined, and humming faintly when touched. She pressed her fingers to its stalk. It pulsed, and then she heard it, faint, far, but unmistakable, a beat, not of death, of remembrance, not a curse, a call, to never forget,
to never bury silence again. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Namthip packed a small bundle. No one asked where she was going. No one needed to. They watched her walk the road out of the village, the dust soft beneath her feet, her eyes forward. She didn't look back. She didn't carry fear. Only memory. Only silence. And within it, a drum that no longer needed to be heard to be real.
The smoke had not yet cleared when Niran awoke in the charred ruins of the forest. Ash rained from the sky like snow, blanketing everything in a soft, deceiving stillness. His ears rang with silence, a strange, suffocating absence where once there had been screams, drums, and the cracking of fire. He stumbled through the blackened underbrush, calling out weakly, "May?" No answer. Only silence. The monastery was gone. Nothing remained but charred stones and melted brass. Where the great drum once stood, there was only a deep crater, its edges scorched, its center filled with soot. But Niran could still hear it. A faint beat. Dum, dum, dum. At first, he thought it was his heart, but it wasn't. It was distant, hollow, and it was coming from beneath the earth. He followed the sound, dazed, barefoot, lips cracked with soot and thirst. He passed the crumbled remains of the forest's sacred trees, blackened as if mourning their own deaths. He walked until he reached the village outskirts, and there, standing in front of the charred gate of his home, was May Pailin. She was untouched by ash, dressed in white, hands folded neatly before her, eyes closed, praying. "May," he whispered. Her eyes opened, and Niran took a step back. They were empty, hollow, pupils gone. But she smiled. "Child," she said, her voice both hers and not hers, "it is done. You have opened the way." Niran's knees buckled. "What do you mean?" She turned her head slowly toward the horizon. The sun was rising, but the light didn't warm the earth. It bled across the sky like diluted blood. A sickle of red light sliced across the clouds, casting long shadows of shapes that did not move like humans. "They are here," May Pailin whispered. "The ones who listen, the ones who have always listened." She raised her hands, and from behind her the villagers emerged, dozens of them. Children, elders, men, women, all of them covered in soil and ash, all of them with eyes wide open but lifeless, and all of them began to drum, not with instruments, but with their bodies, palms slapping their chests, feet pounding the earth, heads tapping walls, a symphony of human percussion, a resurrection of rhythm, a rebirth of ritual. Niran screamed, but no one heard, because now the whole village had joined the song of the dead. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. Niran didn't know anymore. He was kept inside the monastery ruins, in what had once been the ceremonial chamber. Now it was hollowed out, shaped like a drum itself. The walls reverberated with every beat, as if the forest itself had become an enormous instrument, alive, pulsing, hungry. He had not eaten, he had not slept, but he had learned, because the spirits had taught him. At night they came, whispered in the voice of May, of Lek, of Suman, even of his father, but when he turned, it was always the same. Empty smiles, hollow eyes, and mouths too wide to belong to the living. "We're not gone," May would whisper. "We are remembered." That was the curse, Niran realized. The drum did not summon the dead, it remembered them. And in remembering, it reanimated them. So long as someone beat the drum, no soul could truly leave. So long as the ritual continued, they would always come back, twisted, tormented, endless. And now it was his turn. They gave him the drum, not the ancient one that was destroyed in fire, but a new one, freshly made. Its skin was not from cowhide, it was human. The bones used to frame it still bore the rings of monkhood, still smelled like May, still wept when struck. They placed it before him, smiling. May Pai Lin kissed his forehead, and the chanting began. He tried to resist, he tried to break the drum, but every time he struck it, he saw them, the dead, all of them, smiling, weeping, waiting. Each beat was a memory, each rhythm a resurrection. He played until he bled, and the drum fed on it. Years later, tourists who trekked into the forest near Mae Sakut would tell of a strange sound echoing through the trees, a drumbeat, steady, endless, haunting. Locals would always warn, "Do not follow the sound." They would not say why. They would not say who was playing, because they were afraid that to speak of it was to call it. But the brave or the foolish who ventured close enough said they found a shrine made of roots and bone. A boy sat in the center, eyes closed, hands moving, drumming, always drumming. And beside him, dozens more, waiting to remember.